So November 17th, and let's take a look. Pending proposals, no-op method call. I think, did we talk about this last time? Let's see. We did. I don't have any more updates. It doesn't look like there's been a lot more conversation, unless I missed something. But I think the final comment period ended, I guess. So I guess we'll just encourage Aaron to go ahead and follow up on a PR.
Yeah, I think this is one of those places where there's a Lang MCP and a compiler MCP and maybe a PR. And
right. It doesn't really need an RFC or anything. So macro argument keywords. Is there any further discussion we want to have here? Seemed like, right, bringing this back in cache. Last time we felt like there was more discussion to be had about what the best plan was, but we didn't know. That's probably where it stands still, right? I'm not sure whether that's what exactly that means for this proposal, I guess. It sounds like it means maybe we would favor people, if people wanted to make a project around macro forwards compatibility, we might be all right with that, but someone would have someone who would do it and pursue it. We need names. Does that sound right? Okay, I'm going to assume that's a yes. Last time we talked, so conclusion is
what would it take to figure out the $ self question here, and if we wanted to do a different a syntax separation between special tokens and bindings here? Because I didn't feel like we got to, oh, we should definitely do it one way or the other last time.
I don't know. What would it take? It probably takes getting some, like, what's the range of options? The range of options is either we do this proposal and we work out their compatibility story, or we come up with some new syntax that is not shared between special keywords and identifiers. Is that right?
Right, which seems like it also needs something for $crate, maybe. So they both need a migration strategy of some sort.
Right. Josh mentioned that their audio isn't working, and he said that the next step is a crater run to evaluate impact. I suppose so, although we do kind of know that $self is used pretty widely, so I'm not sure if we
I mean, I don't think we need a crater run to tell us that $self is like prohibitively expensive to do without at least an addition change and a Rust fix, right?
Right.
Yeah, it seems like this is definitely an addition boundary change, and we know that by now.
So Josh says we're finding out 20 uses or 2,000. I think that's fair. Can we do that with like riprep? It seems like $self is very greppable, but so yeah, okay. Range of options is $keyword. I have to admit I'm a bit reluctant to introduce some new sigil into macros. We're already pretty sigil heavy, but Yeah, I think the way forward here, I guess, in my view, is some people who care to get together and talk it over. Let's kind of make a project around it if we want to do it. I do think there is a forwards compatibility thing that is worth considering if we can address it.
I think, like, doing nothing, we should not discount it as an option.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the urgency here. It feels low.
Because like this was just some syntactic sugar that seemed nice to have,
right?
That we didn't realize would like conflict with tons of crates. And we also can think about it for the macros 2.0 syntax, reserving names for that and being able to add features to that in the future.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
How alive is macros 2.0 in terms of being a thing that people are working on?
No more than usual, but like,
okay.
But I think it is a good point that if we were going to put energy into macros, wouldn't we rather put energy in that direction, perhaps?
I mean, it's a cost-benefit trade-off as always, right? Like,
well, in particular, I'd much rather see work around Petroshenkov's PR to make pub macro rules a thing and stuff like that. But I mean, it's a totally different space of exploration. It'll make more of a difference in people's lives.
I guess, are you thinking that the people who would work on both of these things are the same people, and that?
Well, that's what I meant by it's a different range of exploration. I don't know, like.
It feels sort of orthogonal to me in terms of like the work to implement like, you know, $:self or whatever it is seems like a lot more narrowly scoped than like do macros 2.0.
Yeah, I feel like as someone who doesn't really know very much about the compiler, I could hack a forward incompatibility lint and for, hey, you used a keyword in a macro argument. And that's a completely different level of investment in something from trying to actually make macros 2.0 go forward.
But Nika didn't say macros 2.0, he said, like, Petroshenkov has a PR up that would make, like, get rid of macro export attribute, basically. And, like, focusing our attention on the design of that to make sure that's good seems better than this to me.
Sorry, Boats, are you making the argument that like the time we're spending now as a Lang team could be better spent, not the time from compiling?
Yeah, I don't mean now in this meeting, but if we continue to pursue this, we're going to keep talking about it in meetings, right? And also on issues and things, and like.
Yeah, I'm more sympathetic to that like line of discussion because like the compiler like work seems kind of unlinked.
This was what I meant, that our overall Lang team bandwidth, like, is what we're talking about. But
yeah. So I think there's a fair statement there that this is not urgent enough that we should try and do it for 2021, and we know it needs an addition change of some sort. So maybe we should just close this out and say, hey, this is a bit more of an investment than we thought it was. Maybe we'll come back to it later, or ideally macros 2.0 will just happen.
That's kind of where I'm at, that we could do it in 2024 if we came to it. And I feel like, or we can do it as part of a new macro syntax. And I just don't see us having the total engineering bandwidth, but I wouldn't object if people want to do a create a run and a little exploration. But.
Josh, do you have any thoughts about closing this out as one of the people who is more interested in it?
I think Josh's audio is not working. Oh, I see a comment actually. The issue is any potential future extension of macro syntax needs some extension point. I think there's value in considering at least the alternative syntax approach, $, like $. I guess my concern is that those kind of discussions are they take a lot of time. But.
I don't think that's less tied to the addition than reserving, like, because it's like we would deprecate $sign crate, presumably, but like
right.
we wouldn't have to hard break it until 2024. So we could do that in 2 years, a year and a half or whatever. Like it doesn't have the same time pressure as trying to reserve it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So maybe we should just rule, because that's a pretty big breaking change. Maybe we just rule that out. And so we don't want to do this. We want to instead either incorporate this into the design of macros 2.0 or consider an alternative syntax. I mean, and I guess if this is still totally unresolved in 2.5 years, then we could consider it for 2024. But
yeah, I'm in favor of that for the time being.
I like that summary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's realistic that it will be, so I wouldn't write that because.
I know. All right, let's move on. So, yes, and Josh notes it would be great if we considered these things.
Yeah, exactly. We should have maybe in 2024 we need a cutoff of when we will just decide no, we will not consider new edition changes. That's like a solid 2023 or something,
We tried to do that. I don't know. I agree though.
Theoretically, we've said no, that anything for 2021 needs to be feature complete, if perhaps not bug free, at the end of 2020, right?
Something like that. Yeah, we're not there yet, but we're working on it. I do feel like I guess a reasonable rule is to say, though, it's a pretty high bar for adding new work at this moment. Along this line, I do have at least one update, which I didn't ever write into the never type stabilization. They spent some time talking to Blitzer last week, and we came up with conclusions. First of all, that the lint I had in mind, I don't know, it seems to have too many false warnings and cause problems, but we also came up with a possible idea that we have to explore of a change to the inference process, such that the idea being basically that the fallback can sometimes fall back to unit and sometimes never, depending on how it gets, depending on whether it leaks into live code. I'll try to write up a better explanation. I won't do it in the meeting. But the intriguing thing about this idea is that it would, I believe, avoid breaking any code. So it makes our rules somewhat more complex, which is a downside. So yeah, I'm feeling a bit like, I don't know, this never type thing is a pain in the butt. That's my conclusion. The description here of false warnings is still accurate. Anyway, I know that was not very specific, but I will leave it for now and happy to talk about it with folks who want to discuss in more detail offline in the Project Never Type channel. That's probably the best use of time. Any other updates from active projects? Like, I guess RFC 229, I can share that the implementation continues. FFI Unwind, I would add that implementation continues very, very slowly, or at least, but it's still going, and accurate, as far as I know. But Batman's been talking about, I think he been working towards a draft to deal with the long jump issue, which was the remaining part of this work. So I'll leave that comment as still basically good. But safe transmute. What's been going on with safe transmute? I'm curious whether anyone has any updates there.
I don't think there's been much activity the last week or two.
Okay.
Zulip seems to has a bunch of conversations about what exactly should the new trait that's under discussion actually mean, and what does it mean for Semver changes going forward, if like, especially if we start defining more layout things or whatever.
I see. So privacy. Okay, but it seems like we're working towards this a more minimal variant. Is that correct? Still.
Yeah, I think there are still some questions because it adds another these neglect parameters, some stuff around that kind of, and I remember I had a question about the muckable thing, but I don't know if it was ever answered. I'd have to look at the RFC thread.
Josh writes, the open question is, what trait or traits do we require on a type before allowing safe transmute? Okay. All right. So work progresses. One thing that, yeah, okay. Sounds good. Let's move on from that then to nominated PRs, I guess, and RFCs. So some of these things we've been through before. OR patterns, what's the status on that? Last time we kind of clarified some open questions. Seems like we might be able to unnominate this at this point. Or there was going to be a crater run. I guess the question is whether we have any results. This was if we were going to change match patterns. Looks like we don't yet have those results. Okay, I'm going to unnominate this and request that people nominate once we have data available. Okay. Mutable borrow reservation conflict lint. This is the two-phase borrows lint. I don't think there's been any real updates in the last couple of weeks. We're still kind of at this point where we don't quite know what we should do and whether to just give up and accept it or keep the lint. I'm kind of inclined to close this PR and leave the lint in its current status a little longer, but I also would not object to removing it. I think going to hard error at this point is probably not a good idea, not warranted. The only reason to keep it IC is that it does seem like it's serving its job. We have accumulated some number of dependencies, but they're mostly in GitHub repos and not crates.io. But I remember last time, Josh, I think it was Josh or maybe it was Felix, was going to take a look at some of the patterns and see if there was any interesting information there. Felix said, okay. I'll just put, I'm going to remove the nomination. Does anybody feel strongly towards lint should be removed and we should just accept the pattern or anything like that? Kind of straw poll-y.
Whenever I've looked at these examples, I've been kind of surprised that they work, so.
So I guess that would be no.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I would propose we just kind of leave it. Back to that. Any updates on the default issue? Does it still be nominated, or are we kind of nominating it. I guess we don't have a decision. I think I stand by this comment that I wrote 6 days ago. Josh says that they would love to just close it. I could live with closing it myself. I would like to see a kind of write-up if we're going to keep going, because there's been a lot of back and forth and examples.
I'm leaning close as well.
Seems like it'd be nice to have like a why. What is the?
To me, the why is because the trade is global, and just because you can call something like the call on a function requires an instance. This is a new capability. I don't think it's obvious that this is a correct new capability. It's different from how it would work if it was, you had a struct with a private constructor and a public method, which is basically what the function Voldemort types are.
I'm gonna try to take some notes on what you just said.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing where I would tend to pattern match it against, a year and a half ago, we made this change and we weren't completely sure about it. And sure enough, there's now a hole in the type system. I'm not suggesting there is one here, just that I would be very hesitant to make this kind of change with the level of confidence or lack thereof that we have that it's correct.
The other thing that's coming to me here is I heard a bunch of comments at some point about these conversations have been making people feel slightly less good about all of the places we made things copy and clone. And if we're sort of worried about, oh, maybe those other traits have some corners that aren't quite as smooth as we'd like, then I'm worried that this one would be more of that.
Yeah.
Why are people worried about copy and clone?
I think it's interesting that it makes the closure capture RFC technically a breaking change, for example.
It already was, though, because of destructors. But
I think the main argument I saw was that without them, if you pass someone an FN once, they can actually only call it once. But if you have copy clone implicitly derived, essentially, then you can't, like you have to think about the fact that copy clone exists. So like you can't potentially do some weird things inside the closure.
They can't if they don't know, if they don't have a bound that it's.
Well, especially.
I was going to make exactly the same comment Boat just made. So
Yeah.
I wonder what's going to happen with specialization, though.
Yeah, I was going to say modulo specialization.
I don't know what the plans are there, but can memswap call a function if you swap function types? Can memswap call them if it used specialization?
And also, but like
obviously memswap wouldn't, but
what?
I don't know what memswap has to do.
Why would memswap call a function? Okay, sorry.
So any random safe code that you happen to pass a reference to that happens to get the type somehow can now call the function. I guess memswap has an instance, so that's not the point. But
you're talking about default, Scott.
Yeah.
Not copy. Okay.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. I used the copy thing today and thought, oh, this is copy. I can use the copy thing, and so I like the copy thing based on the fact that I used it in the last 6 hours. So
I like the copy thing, but I wrote the RFC, so that's unsurprising.
Yeah. I don't think I dislike the copy thing. I'm just looking at some weird things like when should I be using FN once plus clone as a bound instead of FN or things like this.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's what's sort of interesting about the copy and clone thing is it makes it like more expressive in some ways, where maybe that pattern, like I used the copy thing instead of using a reference to an FN because then I knew they would not have to deal with the indirection for optimize. Like made it seem easier to optimize, right? Um, like these seem like good things to give people, and stuff like worrying about whether someone actually calls the FN only once sounds like you're trying to do something that's probably unsound, actually, right? You're like trying to create some safety guarantee that our type system really actually.
Yeah, I think you're probably right that I'm overthinking things, and really, if you want an FN once that's really only FN once, then maybe then it makes sense that it grabs something that's not cloned. So
yeah,
and then you can't clone it, because if you can clone it, is it really once? Probably not. But
it seems like this is pretty controversial. I'm wondering if PR is not the right venue, but I don't think an RFC would really improve the conversation. So I don't know. But I think the stuff about copy clone kind of made me feel better mildly, in that I did at least come to the conclusion that default kind of like copy and clone, like when you make a closure, you get a bunch of capabilities that may or may not be correct that you can take advantage of, but it's your closure and you sort of decide. Like, in other words, it has to be code that you called from your function. It's hard to leak that outside and like return it to your caller to an unknown number of contexts, unless there are declared bounds, like you returning impl fn once plus default, in which case you clearly opted into it.
yeah.
So I can certainly imagine people liking the fact that they can do default, but I still feel like default feels different than the others in that it doesn't require an instance of the closure.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah, I'm still in favor of the like third trait, or I guess fourth trait proposal a lot more than default, even though I agree that it's sort of more complicated in some sense. But I agree that a PR feels potentially like the wrong way to do it, especially if, I guess it has to be instance stable, right? Like can we feature gate this?
I definitely think a new FN trait is not a PR. That's definitely an RFC.
We can't feature very easily. Well, that's not, is that true? We might be able to feature.
Okay.
Because we can make the.
I feel like.
Go on.
I think I'm still convinced by what Boat said the other day, that like, if we're going to have any safe trait that does this, then default should probably do it too. I sort of feel like I'm feeling a lot of the same safe transmute conversations we've had about, well, but traits are not private, and if the function isn't public, why should default be public, and things like that. And that's where I'm sort of stuck on this one, that if you can't call the function normally, why should its type let you call it the rest of the time?
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
I think really things that
sounds like there's no strong advocate in this room in favor of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I feel like I'm the person who's most in favor and that I would have no problem with it, but I also don't care to have it happen. So like, and I think that code that would do this maybe really should just write its own trait or something instead of using an FN trait. And like, I don't think there's anything that you can't do because you don't have access to this really. Like, it's not adding any particularly interesting expressivity to the language.
Do you use unsafe transmute today? From a zero side?
Because it's in generic context always, and you can't transmute in generic contexts.
That's true.
You can probably pointer cast since it's zero sized, and that.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. You can do it. Okay.
I think all this is doing I think there's two things that this is doing, and I'm not sure that either one of them is important enough. So one, this is a bound that the compiler can check for you rather than getting runtime errors. And then it's safe to do this rather than the unsafe thing that Mark was just mentioning. And I kind of feel like it being unsafe to do this is the right way.
I don't know if I agree it has to be unsafe, but I think I'm in favor of, just to get this off our plate, closing for the time being. I would like to see a nice write-up, but that we can keep for a future, because it feels like we hit on some interesting points here. But okay, just someone want to take an action item to FCP close this with a comment that tries to summarize? Josh?
Would also be good probably to ask the author of the PR, anybody else interested, to write a design note summarizing the discussion and such.
The other thing I would say is I feel comfortable also saying sort of a note, not the second, but maybe even say made more progress or something that may influence the, maybe not, but all right. I will try to write something. Write that down. Maybe I'll bother.
I'd be happy to write this up if you'd like.
Okay, even better. Yeah, you do it. Okay. Clarify rules for ZSP. I am in conversation with Ralph about this. I'll report back later. Support pub on macro rules. Just for a note. So we left a comment here. I think there was some conversation last time about whether we need an RFC.
Right.
I guess there's not been any much in the meantime. I do feel like this would be a great change, and I'd like to see it go forward. I wonder if, I don't know if there's anyone in this call who wants to work with Petrochnikov on that. But I think
I'm wondering if there potentially is a way to do this a little bit more lightweight than a full RFC. In particular, we already have a spec for the behavior in question here that I mentioned this in a comment in that thread, that the reference already describes the other way of resolving macros, which we use for modular macros as opposed to macros that only live at the top. And Petrochnikov confirmed that that's what we're doing, path-based scoping. So rather than having to do a full spec here, it seems like we could just say something like pub switches you to path-based scoping and have a prepared patch for the reference.
But so I still think an RFC makes sense, but part of the, because I think I think this is a major user visible change, and that's what the RFCs are for. But I'm not sure, do we want to say that pub makes it user visible, but that if you don't use pub, it's still the old behavior? I guess that feels kind of inconsistent to me, and I might prefer to say in a new edition, they behave like other items unless you tag them as macro export. I don't know where.
I do think that's the right answer for a new edition, that we should make it so that it works with pub, pub crate, pub self, or like if you do nothing at all, it's private. The question is then, do we want to have the possibility of using pub, pub crate, and pub self on existing macros and without an addition boundary, or do we want to just do this at an addition?
I mean, yeah, I think that it has to be, because I agree with Nico that I think the current behavior of a non-exported macro where it's visible in all the code that is textually after the macro, I would not like that to be the behavior if you don't add a visibility marker, but if you do, then it has normal like visibility behavior, right? So I think that it has to be an addition, or rather that would make it, that would be a requirement that it be an addition, because, but it's not like.
What I can imagine is that it might be I don't know whether there's a big implementation challenge that no one is signing up for. That would be a little hard to assess. I mean, well, the implementation challenge would presumably be mostly the transition.
Yeah, auto fixing.
Yeah.
No.
That feels like the right story. Maybe that's something to discuss in the thread with Petroshenkov.
Yeah, because if we just add the ability to mark them pub and don't change the behavior by default, then there's no breakage. But if we want to change the
behavior, that's more complicated.
Yeah. Which
I guess I could imagine a story that says we add this, and in 2024 or something, we try to finish the migration.
I really, but yeah, I feel really uneasy imagining having like explain to people that if you mark a macro pub, it works like a normal item, but if you don't, it has really weird behavior, right?
Right. I'm not convinced the implementation is that hard. Depends how nice you want it to be, but I could easily see that it just turns into super : macro in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Underneath in submodules. And we know it doesn't escape the module because that requires a macro export, if I recall.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that right?
Right.
Or you can tag the module.
So this could just kind of gently supplant macro export and people stop using macro export.
That's the hope. I mean, that would be my hope. The story is that macro export is no longer a thing, or it's a deprecated thing. And if you use that, you get some old weird behavior. But if you don't use that, it's an item.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it doesn't seem necessarily that hard to fix because you just, every like invocation of the macro, you find what it's invoking under the current system and then get the path to that and replace it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could also imagine replacing with like pub crate or something, and then always using the root, like crate : foo, which would work in like 90% of cases unless you're doing fancy things and like overwriting your macros.
But I thought with pub then now it's at the location that like it's not at the top level anymore. That's macro export behavior.
Right. I mean, if the super thing is more complicated, like I could imagine super : super : super looking really weird, and a path from the root being sort of easier to explain in some sense. But in any case, it doesn't seem like, thinking about it, it doesn't seem super complicated. But I think asking Petroshenkov makes sense.
Okay. Is there anyone who is interested in working towards an RFC on this? This might be a place to go look for liaisons, like we've talked about, trying to get people involved in the Ling team who are not currently actively involved. This might be a good opportunity to work with Petroshenkov and help them get this done. I think they don't have the bandwidth or time.
Do we have consensus that we would be okay landing the PR in the meantime under a feature gate? Because it seems like that would be a good step regardless. Or do we want to wait for the RFC?
I would feel okay, but I would prefer to do it if we knew that there were people who wanted to work towards it. Like I would be fine to land it, and then as long as there's people actively iterating towards the design we want on some schedule. And honestly, I don't care that much. Like if it doesn't make 2021, which maybe is likely because it's close, 2024, I could live with that. But I don't know.
I would be probably interested in at least liaisoning an RFC, even if not necessarily writing it. So.
Okay. All right. Mark, do you want to ping Petroshenkov then?
I will write a comment summarizing this and talk to Petroshenkov about that. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Overlapping pattern. We talked about this last time, or we discussed it very briefly, but I think we ran out of time. There's a proposal to rename overlapping patterns to overlapping ranges, I think, or overlapping range endpoints. It doesn't break code.
Nico, I don't know if it's you, but you're dropping out for me. I think there's some background noise or something.
Oh, I do hear a background noise. Maybe if I speak louder, it'll help. There was a proposal to rename this overlapping patterns to overlapping range endpoints. It doesn't break code. I think the reasoning was, I don't know what the reasoning was, actually. Less confusing.
Because it doesn't test if they overlap beyond the endpoints, I think.
Okay. I guess I feel like I'm inclined to say yes, do it. If there was a discussion among people and they came to this conclusion, I'm okay with it. But I will RFC merge unless somebody raises an objection. Space for promotion. I think this is.
It's an FCP.
FCP, okay. Yeah, people can check their boxes. Nothing else we need to say here.
Should I unnominate it? It doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, please unnominate it. Unused doc comments. Oh yeah, we talked about this before, didn't we? Unused doc comments. I think we concluded we don't want to do anything with this.
That's my recollection.
Okay. I'm gonna leave a comment and try to get it closed. Or someone else can. Splitting strings. This has been an open PR for a while. It's in pre-FCP. I don't think we've ever gotten to it in our agenda. I wanted to call it out. Sorry about getting a lot of pings here. I'm not sure exactly why TLang is on this, but I guess it is sort of TLang. Basically, the question is one of these annoying markdown things where nothing's really specified. What are the separators for tick, tick, tick? And you have different like languages, Rust, comma, ignore, whatever. What should we use as separators? There's a proposal to change it to something more limited. There's a little survey that shows that every system uses its own distinct mechanism. And there you have it. We advise people to engage. Here's a checkoff list. My opinion is we should match somebody. Anyone have any comments about it or anything to add?
Seems reasonable.
Then check it out. Let the people decide. I forget what's actually proposed in there. I think it's going to mostly match GitHub, but be a little different. I hadn't seen it before. But there's a, let me clear this nominated. It looks like there's a PR here having a new kind of lint called must bind, which is like must use, except that let underscore equals doesn't disable it. You have to give it a name, which is intended to catch match guards, I guess. That actually makes some sense. Maybe we can, if anyone has immediate thoughts.
Yeah, I nominated this partially because I still feel like the difference between underscore and underscore some name is really confusing, and almost every time I see it, I am surprised. So I would personally be like inclined to not accept this, and I'd rather pursue some sort of addition change that changes the behavior of underscore to be like actually the same as an underscore guard. or, you know, some I would like almost even lint against uses of underscore, something like that.
I do agree, it's very confusing for people.
And it's very rare that the behavior I actually want is the underscore. So.
If you actually want, I agree, like, if you want the behavior, you should call the drop function, right? And not just.
There are times when I want, well, there are times when I want to ignore parts of a struct or a tuple, things like that. I don't know if it ever actually happens that those parts are also borrowed or otherwise inaccessible to me, but it could happen. That's kind of the, do you know what I mean?
I think it's different if it's in a pattern. Like I don't really, I don't care about it as a pattern. And in some sense, like I would change the behavior and like lint against it or whatever.
But this is also a pattern.
Right, I mean like nested.
You're saying you might lint against let underscore equals X and suggest drop X or something.
On an addition boundary, yeah, like rewrite it and then change the behavior.
You would still potentially perhaps like that.
Yeah, but change the behavior for underscore. Like I do think the behavior for underscore should just be like weird variable name. Perhaps like you can't actually name the variable, but it's not immediately drop the thing, because that seems very rare that you actually want that.
One migration thing I think we have here is that the must use lint tells people to use let underscore equals blah to ignore something.
Right, but I'm not.
There's probably a fair bit of this out there from people who did that.
My point is that I am not opposed to let underscore equals X to be the thing that is, I don't want to use this and I don't want the lint. But what I am against is I use that and now I'm getting an instantaneous drop instead of the like natural behavior of, oh, I'm just ignoring the return value.
I'm worried about
having a binding.
I would be more in favor of, I think this would require an RFC, but I'm more in favor of making it just a straight lint against this pattern. I'm a little bit worried about the incongruity of like if I write let underscore equals foo and let underscore equals foo. Right now, sort of everything drops at the same time. But if under the proposal you were floating, as I understood it, this first case is sort of a special case where the value drops at the end of the block. But in the second case, the two sub values.
No. I'm saying everything is going to be uniform, like independent of what you call the binding, it always drops at the end of the block.
I see. Okay. That means, yeah, that makes the migration a little more complicated, but not
But I agree in any case that it seems RFC level and probably not for 2021 as such.
Yeah. As long as it's, I don't have an opinion yet, but I do agree with, I mean, my opinion is they should be consistent. I don't have an opinion yet on when the right time to drop is, but I can see the case that the current rule as well.
I think having the difference is what's like very surprising.
Yeah. In terms of the way our type system is set up internally, this is a temporary expression whose lifetime is currently scoped to the let. And so what we would be changing is that its lifetime would be scoped larger than the let. It would be scoped to the intermediate block, which we could certainly do.
Scoped to the lifetime of the underscore essentially, except you can't actually name a variable underscore, so you can't actually do anything with that.
Right, that's what, but if that's what, like, if you had, for example, this, because of the way the rules work, this temporary value would be scoped to the end of the block. And so we would be considering that to be what we call an extended lifetime temporary. And it would just all fall out from the rules we have. Okay. That makes me think that some RFC that combines with RFC 66, maybe it's orthogonal, but temporary lifetime might be a nice combination, but or at least it might unlock progress on RFC 66, which was an ergonomics improvement based on the temporary lifetime rules that never got done. And partly because somebody needs to go out and clean up and specify it more precisely. All right. Do we have a conclusion? I think our conclusion was, like Mark suggested, was we don't want to do it to encourage to fix the underlying problem. I think I could get behind that. I would at least want to explore fixing the underlying problem first. Mark, do you want to at least leave a comment and summarize?
Yep, I can do that.
You don't have to drive a conclusion today.
And I will also suggest that they ping me if they are interested in writing an RFC.
Okay. Accept arbitrary expressions in key value attributes. Given that we have 3 minutes, I'm not going to dive into this, but people should check it out. Petr has another PR. Let's jump to this one, which we might be faster. This is the lint level change. Do we still need this to be nominated? I guess we
someone needs to kick off FCP, but other than that, I don't think so.
I will kick off FCP after this call. Prohibit attributes on generic parameters. So it looks like we overlooked some places where attributes can appear. Do we need, seems like maybe we want to create a run.
Yeah, I think exactly what we did with the last one, whatever that was, the one that did it on univariance.
Yeah.
I don't remember what we chose, but we should just do the exact same.
I think we did a crater run, but
yeah, that sounds right.
All right, I'll kick off a crater run. And then let's end this call. Thank you, everyone.